Hello everyone, so I just want to show you a video of this fan art that I posted a while back and just give you an insight of pretty much how I did this or anything. I did thought about wanting to do a video or just a speed painting or speed drawing video for a long time now. I remember doing some test ones for myself on the sidelines just to figure out how to do one and just also get myself mentally prepared. But I remember doing one back in the day, probably like in 2012. I was still in college and I did one, and it was a little sketch of a sketch of a fan art of a Tim from Yu-Gi-Oh! And it was on my desk with orange lighting from my lamp, and I was recorded off of my smartphone, and I didn't have a stand at the time, so I used the ledge on my table, and I didn't use a ledge, correct that, I had a wired shelf that we used to place our kitchen dishes on, and we had a spare, so I pretty much used that and practically peeked the camera through the holes of the wire and recorded from that way, and it was kind of awkward to do, but I was actually kind of, and when I posted it on back in the day, I looked at it and it's like, it's not that good. It was cringy to look at it. But yeah, here we are, 2012, that's a long time ago. Finally actually sitting down and just do it. Just like, I'm just gonna do it. I feel like I'm the point in my life where I'm confident enough to do one, and so here it is. So this is the sketch process that I'm showing you right here. You notice I've done several layers. The first one I did a gesture layer, and then practically the first two I did a gesture layer, to be honest. Beforehand, I sketch it out into my sketchbook, and most of my drawings when I do like digitally, I pretty much sketch in my sketchbook. Maybe times I sketch it to straight up sketch it onto my drawing program, which is Clip Studio Paint is what I'm using here. But also majority of the time, half the time I sketch it in my sketchbook, scan it, and then just redraw it. So this is basically a process of my sketching right here. You're seeing it's one layer is a gesture skeleton, next layer is basically more of a gesture trying to get the planes or just trying to get the body proportions, structures right, and of course you need flipping the canvas back and forth to make sure everything looks even, make sure everything looks proportionally good. And then another one is just like pretty much just clean up the make sure like see where the muscles are and everything. Just help me plan out a little bit so I know like where I'm gonna put how the clothes is gonna fold over, where the wrinkles are, and then just also just get the idea how the faces look. And then after all this is done and deal with, I pretty much do a final sketch, which is basically I just go back, redraw on top of it, and then just clean it up a bit before I get it ready for inking. And that's basically helps me out to get ready for the inking part, which is probably going to pop up anytime soon. And I use also the grid tool to help me align it a little bit to make sure everything looks centered and everything. So that way it will look even and basically looks okay and looks alright for the work. So this is basically line art that I do when I do my digital works. When I do my line, you notice I pretty much use a system of going back and just thicken up the lines as I go a little bit. I like to have like, what's the word I'm looking for? What's the thing is? Pretty much add weight to areas, like see what areas is dark and then see where areas is basically just going around the edge and everything. But when I do my inking right here, I always use like a soft brush or something like that. I pretty much take one of the inking tools I have and I adjust the settings to it where it has pretty much like a softer feel to it, almost kind of like close to a watercolor type brush, similar to what I want to say pretty much close to what an actual ink like a quill ink do, but I think the quill ink's actually a little bit thicker than I if I remember correctly. I also, another thing that you notice is on the Master Sword, when I ink the Master Sword, I have the grid tool open most of the time, and I also use the AI guide to help me align the certain parts of the Master Sword to make sure everything looks even, make sure everything looks symmetrical. And there's actually a little part like under the gem on the Master Sword that I went back and fixed later, that I noticed that I didn't center it properly as I continued to ink the Master Sword, and so I actually went back and fixed that, of course. But pretty much what I did is I just used the guide tool to help me with the Master Sword. I also had a reference in front of me. I personally have the Creating a Champions illustration book, and also Howard Historia, and Howard Historia has like illustrations of Zelda games in the back of the book that they display. So I pretty much used that as well, and that actually helped me a little bit with I was sketching out the Master Sword earlier, as well as sketching out Link's tunic as well, just because when I want to do Ocarina of Time Link for a while, I always get his collar. I think it's just it's the type of collar he has, the little flap collar on the top. I just have a little trouble just working on those sometimes. I think that's just normally what I just like collars in general, so I think that's just something I just have to look into and just work on a little bit more, is those type of folded over collars, because I could just do like regular old cuff collar or just a regular old just like t-shirt collar, but when it comes to like flap collars like those, it's just a little hard. I think it's just how it's folded, it's just a little hard to do it that way, so that is something that I personally need to work on too, so oops. Okay, but speaking of which, I've actually did not grow up playing the Zelda series. As a kid, I was more of the PlayStation child, so I grew up mostly with Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasies and anything else that came along for it. I'd actually never had like an N64 or a GameCube or anything. My cousins did. They had the Nintendos and I had the PlayStation, so there we go. But I didn't start playing or get into Zelda until I was in my late college years, practically in the verges when I graduated, and that was a time when I was just not really doing well. So, and I've also already heard a little bit about this series as well, and anything from Nintendo, but I just never personally played it or didn't know much about it. I just know a little bit of it from people that I knew in college, and that's pretty much it. And the first Zelda game that I picked up was pretty much Ocarina of Time, and it was on the 3DS too. I absolutely loved the game, and I just started playing any other Zelda titles that I can practically play as well. After Ocarina of Time, it was the Twilight Princess, then Skyward Sword, and then I did a little bit of Majora, which I need to finish, by the way. I keep telling myself I need to finish Majora Mask. It's such a good game as well, but I never got back to finish it. Oh my goodness. I also dabbled a little bit in Wind Waker as well, but then when Breath of the Wild came out, that's basically my favorite out of the entire series, mainly because the art direction in the game, it pretty much reminds me so much of Studio Ghibli or Miyazaki films, because I grew up watching Miyazaki, Disney, Don Bluth is another one I grew up watching a lot too. So seeing the pretty much the soft cell shading and the soft lighting and everything in the game with Breath of the Wild, I instantly just fell in love. Also, I'm also a big fan of open world games as well. So that was a win-win. But overall, the series just helped me gotten out to a time when I was just not doing so well, and it just gave me it just taught me something. It just taught me of not giving up and just being confident in ways, even though I still struggled to be confident once in a while. It helps me and inspires me a lot. And it is pretty much literally my favorite video game series I've ever played, along with the ones I grew up with, Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts. I adore the Zelda series so much in my adult life. So basically, my childhood was, like I said, my childhood is basically Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy. Those are the two games I always go back and look for nostalgia, and it just always gives me a good feel for. But it was the Zelda series that got me through my adult life right now. It's kind of hard to explain. It's one of those type of feelings that's kind of hard to explain without tearing up and being a little shy about talking about something you absolutely love. So sorry about that. Anyways, back to the art. The one thing I do want to point out is I try not to do straight black. When it comes to my line art, I try to do like a really dark color, like a dark blue, a dark green, anything that pretty much goes along with the one main color, which is green, by the way, of course, because it's green tunic. That is going to be going through the art, and so I try to make sure I start off with the line art with something that dark color, even though later on when I get to the coloring process I go back and color the line art, but I try to keep the base color of the line art that I drew right now in the inking process visible in the way. But anyways, also another reason why I don't use a straight black for my coloring, because you'll notice that later on when I do start coloring the drawing, I put a dark gray back behind it. That way it'd be easier to see the line art a little bit better, especially when I have to go back and edit erase some of the coloring off of it that doesn't really need to be there, and just get some extra few things off of it. And also, you'll notice I put, I'm actually getting ahead of myself too, but when I do my coloring later, I also do a base color on the bottom, so that way, and knowing that will be the main color that will seep through most of my work in a ways, and just get that color just seeping through, and that also helps a little bit with the line art as well for me. Also, with the line art section, I also take this opportunity to add like little extra details I want to include in the work for the neck hairs on his hair, because his hair looked a little too poofy and it just didn't look even or balanced enough. There we go, balanced enough. So I add the neck hairs on the bottom of his neck to make it look a little bit more balanced. And I also fixed his nose. I didn't realize his nose was not centered as well, so I had to go back and fix his nose a little bit, moved it over a little bit, and then just went back in and started inking his nose. And I can't help but giggle that it looks like a face right there. You get the little nostrils in the mouth, and it's like, oh, it looks like a little face right there. like some of those post videos you see going around back in the day, or probably online as well, that when people go put their faces upside down, and it's just like all you see is their nose and their mouth, and they put little googly eyes on the chin, and they're like, look, it's a face. So yeah, here's the coloring portions right here, and when I color, I pretty much treat it like I do how I approach when I want to paint on a canvas. And the brush sets I use is basically a default gouache brush, and a little bit of a watercolor brush, basically a watercolor brush as well. When Clip Studio Paint updated. It included gouache brushes and a blender to go with it, and that's basically what I use mostly for these paintings. I absolutely love the set. And I also use a brush set that you can download if you have a Clip Studio account. You can download for free, and it was an alcohol marker brush set that someone has set up that you can use, and I absolutely love that one to death. Because when I do my traditional works, I use alcohol markers a lot, and it just using those type of brush sets, it just really is nice to use that. Also, it just gives that more of a softer feel when you want to add like a little extra like shade, like a little soft shade to go with it, so the shades won't be too harsh, as well as soft lining on it, so it won't be so harsh as well. And so this is basically the shading part. What I normally do is I color shift the color around. For instance, it's purple mainly, or like blue violet, and then I shift it over to more of a bluish color, and then I just make a layer on top of that, and I pretty much set it to the opacity set for multiply, and that will give like a little bit more of a darker purple, or like sort of towards a blue, to help make sure it gives like a little bit more of a 3D pop in a way. One thing I do try to do when I put in the when I start doing the shading and everything, I also use a blending brush, and the blending brush I have is basically a watercolor type blending brush, and it was really challenging not to overblend and try to make it and give some of that harsh shading lines that you see on the hint of the sword right here. Trying to not make it overblend and make it too muddy or anything else. Just like I said, just give it like a little bit more of a 3D pop, or just not make it too flat per se. Once in a while, I do go back and take the alcohol brush like I mentioned earlier, and then just try to soften up the shading a little bit, because some of them did look a little bit too harsh, and it was just didn't bounce enough that well. So that's what I use the alcohol brush that I have to soften it up a little bit and make sure it just doesn't go off too harsh. So it's basically a balance between trying to give like more of a harsh shadowing, as well as giving more of a softer look to the work. Basically, like I mentioned earlier, I just go into it like I'm painting on a canvas, and just treat it like I'm painting on a canvas. Because when you're doing it digital art, it's basically pretty much like another medium to do that. And instead of just using actual paints or anything, you're just doing it on a screen. And there's sometimes some downsides with doing digital art and as well as traditional art. You can get away with a lot of things in digital works, like with those little shortcuts and everything, Control-Z, color shifting, anything along with the sorts for examples. But with traditional works, once it's on paper, it's on paper. There's ways you can actually try to like fix it a little bit, especially with coloring and line art. I know when I did my traditional works, just sketching away in my sketchbook, and I was just inking with ink brush pens that I have. Once in a while I get like a fingerprint, or I just smudge on my paper, and I just never noticed it because I was so into what I'm doing at the time, I'm not even paying attention, and that's a really bad habit. And so that's basically take a time to either treat it like a happy little accident, as Bob Ross would say, and just try to work around it, put it into the art itself, and try to make it work for you. And it's kind of like a way how I train myself when I do my work as well. And with digital art, you have like I said, you have opportunities to actually just go back, Control-Z, undo, or just go over it a little bit, or erase the section that you don't want there, and then just go from there. But when I do my digital works, I try to think, I try to think like, how will I tackle this? How will I paint this? How will I do this when I work on my traditional works, or in my sketchbook, or when I paint with my alcohol inks and Copics and watercolors, and just go from there and try to treat it. And I just try to keep in that mindset of how I want to do this. Well, the one thing I do, and then the one thing about is digital work is you have more of a color options to work with and play with. So because when you do mix your paints or just mix inks in a ways, or having a wide selection of Copic markers that you have, sometimes you're looking for that perfect color that you want to, like, you envision that color you want to put into your work, and then you just have to mix and your mediums together, just get that perfect color you want. And sometimes you might not get the color you want, but you can still work around it either way. Digital works, however, you find the perfect color that you want to include into your work, and you can just work around it like that, and it's there for you, and it's more convenient for you. So, like I said, there's some pros and cons when it comes to digital art and traditional artwork, and just to begin with. And right now, I'm just rambling. I'm so sorry. I tend to ramble a lot. So we're here at the sash right here. I'm almost done with this part. After this, with the belts, I wanted to include like a gold color in the belt buckles, and what I did, when you do with speaking of color, since we were talking about color earlier, when I try to do the metal of the belt buckles, when you do in gold, I tried to include a little bit of green color in there, because sometimes when you look at gold, it has a green hue in it a little bit, and that's basically if you want to achieve more of a white goldish hue or a white goldish look. Yeah, there it is. There, I'm putting the color palette right there as well to get it prepared, and that gives you, like I said, that gives, adding a little bit of hint of green in there, or like a saturated green, gives you more of like a white goldish finish. So it's not technically silver in a ways, because when you do silver, it has more of like a bluish hue, like a less saturated hue to it, and then the white gold gets more of a hint of green, like a saturated green for it, and that's how you can get pretty much close to a white gold color if you want to do the white gold. And of course, this is his undershirt. I tend to, when I do undershirts, I'm so used to doing, because I do fan art of the Breath of the Wild incarnation of Link. When I sit down and do a Legend of Zelda fan art, and most of the time his undershirt always has that more of that taupe or cream color, but I had to go back and, like I say, look down at my reference, and I forgot, oh yeah, he has more of a pure white color of his undershirt. And so I also try not to tackle in with just pure white for his undershirt. I try to input a little bit of blues and some grays, mainly towards shifting over to blues, then grays, to help with the shading and and then just the shading a little bit. Then I go back with more of a white, and then I also do a very very light blue, like not totally white but close to it. And then this part right here, I'm doing the tunic finally. My mindset when I was doing this is get the little stuff done, get the Master Sword done first, because for me, the Master Sword was the most detailed part of the digital work that I had on there. So I wanted to get the Master Sword done first before I do anything else, and then I did the gauntlets and the sash and the belt and the undershirt and get that out of the way as well. And then I just did like the tunic and then the cap later on. I used mostly the undertone color that I had already set, the base color already set as my main color, of course. And that's basically, having a base color does help you a lot when you want to color in this big filled area. But also I use, like I said, the gouache brush. It's not really like a super opaque brush as well. It's mostly transparent when you do like one layer, and then there's like and it just gets opaque the more you build onto it. And you can see right here on the bottom left corner was a little bit of blue. That was still some of the base color right there, and when I was adding some more of the color on there to shift up to more of a gradient tone. And see there's a little more on the bottom right there. But I went back and fixed it anyways. Some of them I left them on there because it had like a really nice cool coloring effect as well. But anyways, that's basically a base color is really useful and really good for it. It's just to help plan out the big areas like these, and then you just build on top of it. So I'm wrapping this part up, doing the shading a little bit more with the alcohol brush that I was using, and then the lining as well. And then I moved on to the cap, which is basically I just tackled the same color, the same way as the tunic as well. It's the same color, green cap, green tunic, iconic Link setup, and that people will mostly recognize. Also, another thing that I did, normally when I do my digital works, I always start with the skin first, and then do the hair, and then all the way down, and then just branch out into the clothing. But how I set up this work right here, because mainly it's this clothing and the sword being the main focus of the image, I just save the skin and the hair last, per se. So basically I pretty much did the skin and the hair last for this work as well. And just like I said, I just concentrate mainly on the areas that because like I said, the main focus in area is mainly his Master Sword, and then he got his chest and everything as well. Also, I did not mention this earlier. You notice I have like a swatch of colors all over the place. That's basically my color palettes right there. It's a big mess. I have a separate layer above everything else when I do my works, and I just use that, and I grab like a marker tool and I just help blotch out colors so I know which colors I want to use, which colors I like, and I just plotch it right there and I save it. Pretty much very similar when you approach it when you do a painting on a canvas, when you work with acrylics, oils. It's basically the same scenario what I'm doing. And now I'm falling to the skin. So, like I say, I'm almost done. I'm going to start with this. I'm doing the skin right here. And it's basically, that's how I approach it right here. Nothing too major. However, the skin, when I was working on it, it did look a little too, it looked a little off at the beginning, and then later on I just built it to make it a little bit more softer because it was a bit harsher. And later on I added like a little bit of a blush onto his nose and cheeks, and probably a little bit of his chin and lips, just a teensy bit of blush on there, and some a little bit more of a shiny areas. Now, the one thing I always love doing when it comes to my digital works is always the hair, and that's actually, let me rephrase that. When I'm doing any drawing whatsoever, I always enjoy doing the hair. It's probably because I think I just love doing the textures of hair. My goodness, I can't talk. I just really enjoy doing the textures of hair, and it's just like it's very soothing, very calming to do, and that's the area of the art of my art that I enjoy doing the most. So you can see here, I just pretty much just like use just a flick of my wrist, and the flick just to get the strands in and everything. Also, throughout this entire coloring process, I try to make the lighting come out from one angle. As you can see, one area is a little bit dark, one area is a little bit light. So I try to make it to like it's more closer towards the right, towards this like upper right corner a little bit. But I pretty much go back and then did another set of like a harsh lighting on it later. But you can see here what I'm talking about earlier is that I was doing this is basically the coloring of the line art, where I try to make sure everything looks a little bit more balanced with color and everything else. And then I'm doing a gradient overlay, and I use the gray tone to help give it more or less saturation to the color, so it won't be too much of a pop. And then I did another layer with basically just a blue color, like a bluish violet color, and then I just pretty much erased the edges off it to make sure the lighting is basically coming from behind. And then I noticed the edges on the line art was a little bit too harsh, a little bit too like sharp, so I used a Gaussian blur on the edges and soften it up a little bit. And then I used the artistic tool to help with the coloring a little bit. As you can see, it went a little bit more of a pinkish. And then later on I exported to Photoshop because I know I wanted to put in some text in there, so I went to export to Photoshop, doing some last minute tweakings on the effects, and then I added the text on there, and here it is. This is the final results. I do want to thank you for watching if you have made it through the end and listened to my ramble. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'm hoping to do another type of video like this soon. So see you next time. And just try to work around it and just try to implement. I can't talk, I swear.